The stars looked different out here. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the horizon's edge, watching the endless black through the main viewport. They had been traveling for 3 weeks, mapping systems that no human had ever seen before. It was the kind of work Jake loved. Quiet. Peaceful. Just him, his crew, and the unknown. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange," Sophie Hayes said from the tactical station. Her fingers moved quickly across the glowing controls. Long-range sensors show a massive object ahead. It's not showing up as any known celestial body. Jake walked over to her station and looked at the readings. The object was huge, bigger than any asteroid or moon they had encountered. How far out? About 2 million kilometers. Should we investigate? Jake thought for a moment. That's what they were out here for, after all, to find new things, to push humanity's boundaries a little further. Yes, take us in slowly. Ben, how are the engines? Ben Carter looked up from the engineering console at the back of the bridge. He was a big man with grease permanently under his fingernails. "Running smooth, Captain. We're good to go." "Lisa, start recording everything," Jake said to the communications officer. "If this turns out to be something interesting, Command will want all the data." Lisa Grant nodded and activated the ship's recording systems. She was the youngest member of the bridge crew, only 24 years old, but she was sharp and reliable. The horizon's edge moved forward, its engines humming quietly. Jake watched as the object grew larger on the view screen. At first it was just a dot, then a shape, then something that made his breath catch in his throat. It was a ship. But calling it a ship felt wrong. It was a structure, a fortress, a city floating in space. The thing was easily the size of Earth's moon, maybe larger. Its surface was dark gray, covered in what looked like armor plating. Strange symbols glowed along its hull in deep red. "What in the world is that?" Ben whispered. Nobody answered. They were all staring. "Sophie, are you getting any energy readings?" Jake asked. "Nothing. It's completely dormant, like it's been dead for a long time." They drifted closer. The massive vessel just floated there, silent and dark. Jake had seen a lot in his 15 years of space travel, but nothing like this. Humanity had never built anything even close to this size. Their biggest ships were a few kilometers long at most. This thing was thousands of kilometers across. "Try hailing it," Jake said. "Maybe someone's home." Lisa worked her controls, sending out standard greeting signals on all frequencies. They waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10, nothing. "It's dead," Sophie said. "Whatever it was, it's been floating out here for who knows how long." Jake was about to order them to move closer when the entire ship shuddered. Alarms started blaring. Red lights flashed across every console. "What's happening?" Jake grabbed onto his chair to steady himself. "The object just activated." Sophie's voice was tight with alarm. Massive energy spike. "It's powering up." On the view screen, the giant vessel came to life. Lights blazed across its hull. The red symbols glowed brighter. Deep inside the structure, something ancient and terrible woke up. "Reverse engines! Get us away from that thing!" Jake shouted, but it was too late. A beam of light shot out from the massive vessel, scanning the horizon's edge from bow to stern. Jake felt his skin crawl as the light passed over them. It felt like being watched by something cold and calculating. Then the light vanished. For a moment, Jake thought they were safe. Then Lisa's console lit up with incoming transmissions. "Captain, we're receiving a message. It's being broadcast in English, and French, and Mandarin, and Japanese. It's coming through in every language humanity speaks. How is that possible?" Ben asked. "We just found this thing. How could it know our languages?" "Play it," Jake ordered. The bridge speakers crackled to life. The voice that came through was neither male nor female. It was cold and mechanical, yet somehow alive. It spoke in perfect English with no accent at all. "Your expansion ends here. We are the Vother. We are the end of worlds. Your species has been marked for extinction." Silence filled the bridge. Jake felt his blood turn to ice. "That's it?" Sophie asked. "That's the whole message?" Before anyone could answer, the massive vessel's weapon systems activated. Dozens of gun ports opened along its hull. Each one was bigger than the horizon's edge. "They're targeting us," Sophie yelled. "Multiple weapon locks. Evasive maneuvers. Get us out of here now." Ben slammed his hands down on the engine controls, pushing them to maximum. The horizon's edge lurched forward, diving away from the alien Dreadnought. Behind them, the space they had just occupied exploded in brilliant light. The alien weapons fired silently, each shot powerful enough to vaporize a city. Jake held on as the ship shook violently. More shots streaked past them, missing by meters. Sophie was routing all available power to the shields, but Jake knew they wouldn't last long against weapons like these. "Jump to hyperspace," Jake ordered. "We're too close to the gravity well," Lisa shouted back. "If we jump now, we could tear the ship apart." "If we don't jump, we're dead anyway. Do it." Ben's fingers flew across his controls. "Hyperspace in 5 seconds. 4, 3. Another shot hit them, this time catching their rear shields. The impact sent everyone flying. Jake crashed into his chair, pain shooting through his shoulder. Sparks flew from damaged consoles. The lights flickered. 2, 1, jumping! The universe twisted. Jake felt his stomach drop as the horizon's edge punched through into hyperspace. The alien Dreadnought vanished, replaced by the swirling blue tunnel of faster-than-light travel. For a long moment, nobody spoke. They just sat there, breathing hard, trying to process what had just happened. Finally, Sophie broke the silence. "Captain, that thing knew about us." "It knew our languages. It was waiting for us." Jake nodded slowly. His hands were shaking, and he gripped the arms of his chair to hide it. "Lisa, did you get all of that recorded?" "Yes, sir, everything." "Good, we need to warn the Coalition. That thing called itself the End of Worlds. I think it meant it." Ben checked the damage report scrolling across his screen. "We took a hit, but we'll make it back, barely." Jake looked at his crew. They were scared. He was scared too. In all his years of exploring space, he had never encountered anything hostile. Humanity had found ruins of dead civilizations, sure, but never something that wanted to kill them on sight. "Set course for Firebase Delta," he said quietly. "Maximum speed. We need to warn them about what's coming." As the horizon's edge raced through hyperspace, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they had just started something terrible. That giant ship, the Vother as it called itself, was still out there. And if it really was the end of worlds, then humanity was in more danger than it had ever been before. He just hoped someone would listen to his warning in time. The horizon's edge limped into Firebase Delta 3 days later. Smoke still rose from damaged sections of the hull. Emergency repair crews were already waiting at the docking bay when Jake brought the ship in for landing. Admiral Karen White stood in the command center, arms crossed, watching the damaged vessel through the observation window. She was a woman in her 50s with gray hair cut short and eyes that missed nothing. She had commanded Firebase Delta for 7 years, and in that time no ship had ever returned in such bad condition. Jake walked into the command center an hour later, still wearing his torn uniform. He hadn't slept since the encounter. Neither had most of his crew. "Captain Morrison," Admiral White said, her voice calm but stern, "your report said you encountered a hostile alien vessel. I need details." Jake pulled up the recording on the main display. The command center grew quiet as everyone watched the massive Dreadnought appear on screen. They watched it wake up. They heard the message. They saw the weapons fire. When it finished, the room remained silent. Several officers looked skeptical. Commander Paul Griffin, the admiral's second-in-command, shook his head. "With respect, Captain Morrison, this has to be a mistake. One ship, even a large one? How could it threaten an entire civilization? We have hundreds of warships across Coalition space." "I know how it sounds," Jake said, his voice tired. "But I saw what that thing could do. Its weapons tore through our shields like they weren't even there. If we hadn't jumped to hyperspace when we did, we'd be dead. Or maybe," another officer suggested, "your shields were already damaged. Maybe the readings were wrong. This vessel could just be an automated defense system. Old and powerful, yes, but not a real threat." Jake felt anger rising in his chest, but before he could respond, Admiral White held up her hand. "Enough. Captain Morrison's record speaks for itself. He's been exploring for 15 years and has never filed a false report." She turned to Jake. "But I need more than sensor readings to justify a full military response. Do you have anything else?" Sophie Hayes stepped forward. She had been standing quietly behind Jake, but now she placed a data chip on the table. "We analyzed the message transmission, Admiral. The vessel scanned us for exactly 4 seconds. In that time, it learned every human language. All of them. That's not an automated system. That's advanced artificial intelligence, maybe something even beyond that." Admiral White picked up the data chip and examined it. "How soon could it reach Coalition space?" "Based on its energy signature and probable speed," Sophie said, "we estimate 3 to 4 days. Maybe less." "That's impossible," Commander Griffin said. "We're weeks away from where you encountered it, even at maximum hyperspace speed." I don't think it uses hyperspace like we do, Jake said. I think it has something faster. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. I'm putting the base on high alert. All ships are to remain in system. We'll set up a defensive perimeter. If this thing shows up, we'll be ready. Admiral, with respect, you need to evacuate the base, Jake said. You need to get everyone out of here. And run where? If this threat is real, I need to see it with my own eyes. We'll stand our ground. Jake wanted to argue, but he could see the determination in her face. She wasn't going to change her mind. Over the next 3 days, Firebase Delta prepared for war. 12 destroyers moved into defensive positions around the station. 4 cruisers formed a second line. The battleship Defiant, the largest and most powerful vessel in the sector, took position at the center of the formation. Jake watched from the observation deck as fighters conducted patrol runs. Weapon systems were tested and retested. Marines drilled for boarding actions. Everyone was preparing for battle, but he could see the doubt in their faces. Many of them still didn't really believe the threat was real. On the 3rd day, the alarm sounded. Jake was in his quarters when it happened. He ran to the command center, arriving just as the massive alien Dreadnought dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. My God, someone whispered. Even on the long-range sensors, the thing was terrifying. It was exactly as large as Jake remembered, its dark hull covered in glowing red symbols. But now he could see more details. Thousands of weapon ports, shield generators the size of buildings. This wasn't just a ship. It was a weapon designed to end civilizations, all ships battle stations. Admiral White's voice rang out across every speaker on the base. This is not a drill. We have a hostile contact. Prepare to engage. The Coalition fleet moved forward to meet the Dreadnought. Jake watched from the command center, his hands gripping the railing so hard his knuckles turned white. Admiral, they're not responding to any hails, the communications officer reported. Not even acknowledging our presence. Then we'll make them acknowledge us. All ships open fire. The space between the two forces lit up with weapons fire. Missiles streaked toward the Dreadnought. Energy beams lanced out from the destroyers. The cruisers fired their main guns. The Defiant unleashed everything it had. For a moment, Jake felt hope. Maybe they could hurt it. Maybe humanity's weapons were enough. Then the Dreadnought's shields activated. A shimmering field of energy surrounded the massive vessel. Every shot, every missile, every beam hit those shields and simply disappeared. Not deflected. Not absorbed. Just gone, no effect, Sophie shouted from her station. Our weapons aren't even scratching it. The Dreadnought didn't rush. It didn't need to. It simply moved forward slowly, steadily, like death itself approaching. Then its weapons fired. The first shot destroyed a destroyer instantly. The second and third shots took out 2 more. The cruisers tried to scatter, but the Dreadnought's targeting was perfect. One by one, Coalition ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light. Get those civilian transports out of here, Admiral White ordered. Emergency evacuation now. Alarms blared throughout Firebase Delta. Thousands of civilians rushed toward the evacuation ships. Children crying, parents carrying whatever they could grab, everyone running for their lives. Jake saw a young pilot sprint toward the fighter bays. He recognized him, Danny Brooks, just 22 years old, fresh out of the academy. Where's he going? Jake asked. Somebody has to buy time for the evacuation, Sophie said quietly. The fighters are volunteering. Jake watched as dozens of small fighters launched from the base. They were so tiny compared to the Dreadnought, like insects attacking a mountain, but they flew anyway. Danny Brooks pushed his fighter to maximum speed, weaving between the alien weapon fire. He wasn't trying to destroy it. He was trying to get close enough to scan it, to learn something, anything that might help. His console lit up with data as he flew within meters of the Dreadnought's hull. He could see the metal regenerating where Coalition weapons had managed to chip it. The ship was healing itself in real time. This is Fighter 7, Danny's voice came over the radio. I'm uploading scan data now. The ship is regenerating. Repeat, it's regenerating damage. We can't win by attrition. Fighter 7, break off, someone ordered. Get out of there! But it was too late. A beam from the Dreadnought caught Danny's fighter. For a brief moment, Jake saw the young pilot's face on the screen. Then the fighter exploded. Data received, the communications officer said quietly. Fighter 7 transmitted everything before he was destroyed. Admiral White stared at the tactical display. 3/4 of her fleet was gone. The Dreadnought hadn't even slowed down. The evacuation transports were almost loaded, but they needed more time. All remaining ships form up on the Defiant, she ordered. We're going to ram that thing. Admiral, no. Commander Griffin protested. That's an order. Get the transports out of here. That's all that matters now. Jake watched helplessly as the Defiant and the remaining ships turned toward the Dreadnought. They accelerated to full speed, every engine burning at maximum. The Dreadnought's weapons fired again and again, but the Defiant kept coming. At the last moment, Admiral White gave one final order. This is Admiral Karen White. To anyone who can hear this, tell Earth, tell everyone. They're coming. Be ready. The Defiant struck the Dreadnought at tremendous speed. The explosion was massive, bright enough to light up the entire system. For a moment, Jake thought maybe, just maybe, it had worked. Then the light faded. The Dreadnought emerged from the explosion cloud. Its shields were down. There was a dent in its hull, but it was still there, still moving, still hunting. Evacuation complete, someone reported. All transports have jumped to hyperspace. Jake looked at the empty space where the Defiant had been. Where Admiral White had been, she had sacrificed herself and her crew to save a few thousand civilians. It was the bravest thing Jake had ever seen, and it had barely scratched their enemy. Captain, we need to go, Sophie said. The Horizon's Edge is ready. Jake nodded numbly. They ran to the docking bay and launched just as the Dreadnought began destroying what was left of Firebase Delta. Behind them, the base exploded in sections, torn apart by alien weapons. As they jumped to hyperspace, Jake made a silent promise. Admiral White's sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten. Danny Brooks' bravery wouldn't be in vain. Somehow humanity would find a way to fight back. They had to, because the end of worlds was coming and it wouldn't stop until humanity was gone. The emergency session of the Coalition Council began exactly 12 hours after Firebase Delta fell. Every representative from every human world gathered in the Great Hall on New Earth, the capital of human civilization. The mood was tense, scared, angry. President Aaron Blake stood at the podium. He was a tall man in his 60s with tired eyes. He had led humanity through economic crises and colonial disputes, but nothing had prepared him for this. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carried to billions of people across human space. 3 days ago, we lost Firebase Delta. We lost 12 destroyers, 4 cruisers, the battleship Defiant, and over 6,000 personnel. This was not an accident. This was not a natural disaster. We are at war with an enemy unlike anything we have ever faced. He played the recordings. Every representative watched in horror as the Dreadnought destroyed coalition ships like toys. They heard the final message from Admiral White. Some people wept. Others sat in stunned silence. The question before us, President Blake continued, is simple. Do we fight or do we run? Do we abandon our worlds and flee into the unknown? Or do we stand our ground? A representative from the outer colonies stood up. How can we fight that? You saw what happened. Our weapons don't work. Our shields don't work. That thing will destroy us all. Perhaps, Commander Ethan Cole said, stepping forward. He was the Coalition's top military strategist, a man who had spent 30 years studying warfare. But only if we fight it the conventional way. He activated a holographic display showing the Dreadnought. We've analyzed every second of sensor data. Captain Morrison's crew and the late Danny Brooks gave us valuable information. Yes, the vessel is powerful. Yes, it can regenerate damage, but it's not invincible. Then how do we kill it? Someone asked. We don't know yet, but we will figure it out. What we need is time. Time to research. Time to build. Time to prepare. Ethan looked around the room. The Dreadnought is heading for the core worlds. Based on its current speed, we estimate 6 months before it reaches New Earth. 6 months to find a way to stop it. Another representative spoke up. And if we can't? If we spend 6 months and fail, then we've just waited around to die. Then we die fighting, President Blake said firmly. I will not order humanity to become refugees in our own galaxy. This is our space. These are our worlds. And we will defend them. The vote was close, but eventually the council agreed. Humanity would fight. Every resource, every factory, every scientist would be dedicated to one goal: stopping the Vothar Dreadnought. Dr. Nina Foster was brought in later that day. She was in her 40s with dark hair starting to gray at the temples and eyes that burned with intelligence. She ran the Coalition's Advanced Research Division, working on experimental technologies that most people didn't even know existed. Can we build a weapon strong enough to hurt it? President Blake asked her. Nina stood before a small group of military leaders and government officials. Jake Morrison was there too, still wearing his damaged uniform. He hadn't gone home yet. Hadn't slept, maybe, Nina said. We've been researching zero-point energy for 20 years. It's the energy of empty space itself. Incredibly powerful. Incredibly dangerous. Dangerous how? Commander Cole asked. Unstable. The reaction could tear apart whatever ship is generating it. We've never been able to weaponize it safely. But if we could mount zero-point cannons on a vessel large enough to handle the energy output, we might be able to hurt the Dreadnought. How large a vessel? President Blake asked. Nina brought up specifications on the holographic display. We'd need to build something on the scale of the Dreadnought itself. A ship larger than anything humanity has ever constructed. It would take the combined resources of every world in coalition space. The room was quiet. What she was describing was impossible. Humanity had never built anything that large. It would cost more than the entire coalition budget for a decade. How long would it take? President Blake asked. 6 months, maybe. If we start now, if every shipyard works around the clock, if nothing goes wrong. Nina's expression was grim. And even then, there's only a 50% chance the weapons won't destroy our own ship when we fire them. So we build a Dreadnought. Put experimental weapons on it and hope those weapons don't blow us up before we can blow them up, Jake said. Those aren't great odds. Do we have a choice? Commander Cole asked. Nobody answered. They all knew the truth. These weren't great odds, but they were the only odds humanity had. Do it, President Blake said. Build the ship. I'll authorize whatever resources you need. Call it Project Prometheus. As the meeting broke up, Jake found himself standing alone with Nina Foster. She looked exhausted, but her hands were steady as she worked on her datapad. Do you really think we can do this? Jake asked quietly. Nina looked up at him. Honestly, I don't know. The math says it's possible, but possible and practical are two different things. We're trying to do in 6 months what should take 5 years. If anyone can do it, it's you. Maybe, but we'll need more than my research. We need to know more about the Dreadnought, how it works, what powers it, any weakness we can exploit. Jake had been thinking about that. I want to go back out there. Run reconnaissance missions. Hit and run raids. Get you more data. That's suicide, probably. But sitting here feels worse. Admiral White died to give us time. Danny Brooks died to give us information. I need to do something. Nina studied him for a moment. Then she nodded. Okay, I'll give you the best sensors we have. Experimental scanning equipment. If you can get close enough to use them, we might learn something valuable. Over the next 5 months, 2 things happened simultaneously. On New Earth and a dozen other worlds, the Coalition Dreadnought took shape. It was called the Valiant, and it represented humanity's greatest achievement. Thousands of engineers worked without rest. Entire factories were converted to produce parts. Resources flowed in from every corner of human space. At the same time, Jake Morrison led a small fleet of fast ships on dangerous missions. They would jump into the Dreadnought's path, scan it, and jump away before the Vother weapons could destroy them. Many ships didn't make it. Many crews died, but each mission brought new data. They learned the Dreadnought was thousands of years old. They learned it was automated, controlled by an artificial intelligence that had been programmed to destroy any species that achieved interstellar travel. They learned the Vother weren't a species at all. They were a weapon, created by some long-dead civilization to prevent other species from ever threatening them. The worst discovery came during Jake's 5th mission. While analyzing historical data pulled from the Dreadnought systems, they found a long list of species names, hundreds of them, all marked as extinct. Humanity was just the latest target in a cycle that had been going on for thousands of years. The Dreadnought swept through this region of the galaxy every few millennia, wiping out any new civilizations that had appeared. It was systematic, efficient, merciless. We're not the first, Sophie said quietly as they studied the data. And if we fail, we won't be the last. Then we don't fail, Jake said. On the last day of the 5th month, Jake received word that the Valiant was complete. He brought his battered ship back to New Earth and stared up at humanity's hope floating in orbit. The Valiant was beautiful and terrifying. 5 kilometers long, bristling with weapons, armored with the strongest materials humanity could produce. But the most important features were the 6 massive cannons mounted along its spine. The 0-point weapons. Humanity's gamble. President Blake offered Jake command of the vessel. At first, Jake refused. He was an explorer, not a warrior. But when he looked at the list of extinct species, when he thought about Admiral White and Danny Brooks and all the others who had died, he accepted. Sophie Hayes was named his executive officer. Ben Carter would oversee the engineering section and the critical 0-point weapon systems. They selected the best crew from across Coalition space. 300 people who knew they might not survive but volunteered anyway. On the morning of the 6th month, the Vother Dreadnought entered Coalition space. It was heading straight for New Earth, just as predicted. The course was set. The collision was inevitable. Jake stood on the bridge of the Valiant looking at his crew. They were scared. He was scared too. But they were also determined. Humanity had spent 6 months preparing for this moment. "Set course for Kepler Junction," Jake ordered. "That's where we'll make our stand." The Valiant's engines flared to life. Behind them, billions of people watched and waited. Every screen in human space showed the feed. Parents held their children. Strangers stood together in the streets. Everyone watching as their champions flew off to face the end of worlds. As the Valiant accelerated away from New Earth, Jake thought about what Nina had told him. 50% chance of success. Coin flip odds. "But humanity had always been good at beating the odds, Captain," Sophie said softly. "Do you think we can win?" Jake looked at the stars ahead. Somewhere out there, the Dreadnought was waiting. The end of worlds. The killer of civilizations. The ancient weapon that had destroyed hundreds of species before humanity had even learned to make fire. "I think we have to," he said. "Because if we don't, there's no one else who will." The Valiant jumped to hyperspace, racing toward its destiny. The Kepler Junction was a crossroads in space. Multiple hyperspace lanes met here, making it a natural choke point. If the Vother Dreadnought wanted to reach the core worlds, it would have to pass through this system. And the Valiant would be waiting. Jake stood on the bridge watching the countdown. 2 hours until the Dreadnought arrived. 2 hours until everything would be decided. The crew was quiet. Everyone was at their stations running final checks. Ben Carter had been in the engineering bay for the past 12 hours, making sure the 0-point cannons were as stable as possible. Which wasn't very stable at all, but it was the best they could do. "Captain, the evacuation of the nearby colonies is complete," Sophie reported. "If this goes wrong, at least the civilians are safe." "If this goes wrong, nowhere will be safe," Jake said quietly. But he didn't say it loud enough for anyone else to hear. He walked through the ship during that last hour, through the corridors where crew members prepared for battle, past the medical bay where doctors set up for casualties, down to engineering where Ben was making final adjustments. "How bad is it?" Jake asked. Ben didn't look up from his work. His face was covered in sweat. "Honestly, the 0-point reaction is barely contained. Every time we run a simulation, there's a different failure point. The weapon might work perfectly, or it might turn us into a small star. Won't know until we try." "That's reassuring. Hey, you wanted the truth." Ben finally looked up. "But I'll tell you this. If we're going down, we're taking that alien monster with us. I've made sure of that." Jake put a hand on his friend's shoulder. "I know you have." He made his way back to the bridge. Sophie was staring at the main view screen where a countdown showed 1 hour remaining. "I keep thinking about home," she said when Jake sat down. "About my sister and her kids. About whether they'll remember us if this doesn't work." "They'll remember," Jake said. "Win or lose, humanity will remember today." The minutes ticked away. 30 minutes, 2010. The crew fell completely silent. Everyone watching the empty space where the Dreadnought would appear. At exactly the predicted moment, reality tore open. The Vother Dreadnought dropped out of hyperspace 5,000 kilometers away. Even at that distance, it filled half the view screen. Dark, ancient, unstoppable. For a long moment, neither ship moved. The Valiant and the Dreadnought faced each other across the void. David and Goliath. Humanity and extinction. Then the Dreadnought's weapons activated. "Evasive maneuvers," Jake ordered. "Return fire with conventional weapons." The Valiant rolled hard to port as the first alien shot streaked past. Its own weapons fired back. Missiles and energy beams that Jake knew wouldn't hurt the enemy, but might distract it. Might buy them time. The conventional weapons hit the Dreadnought's shields and vanished just like before, just like at Firebase Delta. The alien vessel didn't even slow down. It just kept firing, kept advancing. Shields at 60%, Sophie called out. One more hit like that and we're in trouble. Ben, status on the 0-point cannons? Charged and ready. But Captain, the reaction is already unstable. If we fire all 6 at once like the plan says, there's a 90% chance we tear ourselves apart. Jake gritted his teeth. They had known this might happen. The weapons were too powerful. The containment too fragile. But they had to try. Hold fire. Keep us moving. Sophie, you said at Firebase Delta that you noticed something in the shield patterns? Yes, sir. Every time they fired, their shields flickered for a split second, like they were drawing power from the shields to fire the weapons. If we can overload their shields, we have a chance. But we need perfect timing. Jake thought fast. Can you calculate exactly when they'll fire next? Sophie's fingers flew across her console. The pattern is consistent. They fire every 8.3 seconds. Next shot in 5 seconds. On my mark, fire 1 0-point cannon. Not all 6, just one. Time it for right after they fire during the shield flicker. Captain, 1 cannon might not be enough. We have to try. Fire on my mark. The seconds counted down. The Dreadnought's weapons glowed. They fired another massive shot that the Valiant barely dodged. And in that instant when the enemy shields flickered, Jake gave the order. Fire. Ben activated 1 0-point cannon. The space around the Valiant seemed to twist. Reality itself bent as the weapon unleashed pure annihilation. The beam lanced across space, hitting the Dreadnought right in the center of its hull. For the first time in 6 months, the Vother Dreadnought recoiled. The shot penetrated its shields and tore a chunk out of its armor. Not a huge amount. But it was damage. Real damage. The bridge erupted in cheers. We heard it. Someone shouted. We actually heard it. But Jake wasn't celebrating. He was watching the engineering readouts. The Valiant was shaking. Alarms were blaring. The 0-point reaction was cascading out of control. Ben, contain that reaction. I'm trying. We're venting plasma from 3 sections. The weapon is drawing too much power. Jake made a decision. Rotate the firing pattern. We'll use the cannons one at a time. Give the ship time to stabilize between shots. For the next 20 minutes, the Valiant and the Dreadnought traded fire. The dance was deadly. The Valiant would dodge, wait for the enemy shields to flicker, and fire 1 0-point cannon. Each shot did damage. Each shot also brought the Valiant closer to tearing itself apart. The Dreadnought was adapting too. Its firing pattern changed. The shield flickers became shorter. Its aim became more accurate. Captain, we've lost engines 3 and 4, Ben reported. Hull breaches on decks 6 and 7. We can't keep this up. Sophie suddenly sat up straight. Captain, I've got it. Got what? The pattern. I've been analyzing their shield flickers. They're consistent because they're automated, but if we fire multiple shots in rapid succession, we might be able to overload the shield generator completely. That would mean firing all 6 cannons at once. Yes, sir. Ben, you said that would destroy us. From engineering, Ben's voice came through strained. It probably will, but if we're going to die anyway, might as well make it count. Jake looked around the bridge. Every face looked back at him. Scared but determined. They all knew what this meant. Fire everything and maybe, just maybe, destroy the Dreadnought, but definitely destroy themselves in the process. Send a message to New Earth, Jake said quietly. Tell them we're making our final run. Tell them we're sorry we couldn't come home. Lisa's hands shook as she sent the message. Across human space, billions of people watched their screens and wept. Jake took a deep breath. All hands, this is the captain. We're going to fire all weapons simultaneously. This will likely destroy the ship. I want you all to know that serving with you has been the greatest honor of my life. If we die today, we die protecting everything humanity has ever built. That's not a bad way to go, he paused. All crew to emergency stations. Seal all bulkheads. This is it. The Valiant turned toward the Dreadnought. At full speed, every remaining engine burning. The massive alien vessel fired again and again, but Jake didn't dodge anymore. He aimed straight at it. Ben, charge all 0-point cannons. Full power, the Valiant screamed. Every system was pushed beyond its limits. The hull groaned. Cracks appeared in the walls. Energy arced between consoles. Cannons at 90%, Ben reported. 100%. Captain, we're reading critical levels across the board. The ship is coming apart. Sophie, give me the firing solution. Locked on target. Right at the weakest point in their shields. Then let's end this. For Admiral White, for Danny Brooks, for every human who ever looked up at the stars and dreamed. Jake's hand hovered over the firing control. He thought about his crew, about his ship, about humanity. Then he pressed the button. Fire everything. All 6 zero-point cannons fired at once. The universe itself seemed to scream. The space between the two dreadnoughts became a maelstrom of raw energy. Light and darkness mixed. Reality twisted. The Vother shields collapsed under the assault. The beams tore into the alien hull, cutting deep. Explosions rippled across the massive vessel. Systems failed. The ancient ship that had ended countless civilizations began to die, but the Valiant was dying too. The zero-point reaction was out of control. Explosions tore through deck after deck. The hull was breaking apart. Containment failure. Ben shouted. The reaction is going to consume the ship. Sophie grabbed Jake's arm. Captain, we did it, look. On the view screen, the Dreadnought was torn apart. Huge sections of its hull were gone. It was listing, powerless, dying. But it was still too close. The Valiant's overloading reactor would destroy them both. Jake saw it then. One last chance. One final move. Ben, can you redirect the zero-point energy to the engines? There was a pause. Then Ben understood. Yes. But it would turn us into a missile. Do it. Sophie, calculate a ramming course. Captain, we'll never survive impact. I know. But we'll make sure it's really dead. Ben worked frantically. Redirecting power. Engines at 100%. 200! This is insane. The Valiant surged forward, faster than any human ship had ever moved. The Dreadnought tried to fire its remaining weapons, but it was too late. The Valiant struck the dying alien vessel at nearly the speed of light. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. Both ships vanished in a ball of fire and light that lasted for 10 full seconds. When the light finally faded, there was nothing left but debris. The rescue ships arrived 4 hours after the explosion. They expected to find nothing but wreckage. And that's mostly what they found. Pieces of both dreadnoughts scattered across thousands of kilometers. Metal twisted beyond recognition. The grave of 300 brave souls who had sacrificed everything. Commander Helen Price commanded the rescue fleet. She was a veteran of 20 years and she had seen her share of disasters. But as her ships moved through the debris field, even she was shaken. The destruction was absolute. Keep scanning, she ordered her crew. I know it's unlikely, but we search every piece of wreckage. The Valiant had escape pods. Maybe someone made it out. For 3 hours they found nothing, just debris and more debris. The scan teams were starting to lose hope. Then a young officer named Chris Martin called out, Commander, I'm picking up a faint signal. Emergency beacon, bearing 273. Every ship in the rescue fleet turned toward the signal. There, floating among the wreckage, was a single escape pod. It was heavily damaged, barely holding together. But its beacon was still transmitting. Medical team to the ready room, Commander Price ordered. Get that pod aboard now. The rescue ship's tractor beam carefully pulled the pod into the docking bay. Medical teams rushed forward as the pod's door was forced open. And there, barely alive but breathing, they found survivors. Jake Morrison was unconscious, his uniform burned and torn. Sophie Hayes was holding him, barely conscious herself. Behind them were 7 others. 9 people out of a crew of 300. They were rushed to the medical bay. Doctors worked through the night to stabilize them. Jake's injuries were severe. Burns, broken bones, radiation exposure. But he was alive. They all were. 3 days later, Jake woke up in a hospital on New Earth. The first thing he saw was Sophie sitting beside his bed. Her arm in a cast, but smiling. Welcome back, Captain, she said. Jake tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Sophie helped him drink some water. The Dreadnought? He finally managed to ask. Gone. Completely destroyed. You did it. We did it, Jake closed his eyes. Admiral White's face appeared in his mind. Danny Brooks. Ben Carter. Lisa Grant. So many others. What was the cost? Sophie's smile faded. 291 crew members lost. Ben didn't make it. He stayed in engineering until the last second, making sure we had enough power for the ramming run. Lisa, too. She kept the communications running so we could coordinate the escape pods. Jake felt tears on his face. He didn't try to hide them. They were heroes. They all were. Over the next week, Jake slowly recovered. President Blake visited him personally, thanking him for saving humanity. The media wanted interviews. Everyone wanted to hear the story of how 9 people had survived the impossible. But Jake didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had lost too much. On the 10th day, Jake was well enough to attend the memorial service. It was held at the Great Monument on New Earth, where the names of every person who died fighting the Vothir were being carved in stone. Thousands of names, thousands of lives. Jake stood with Sophie and the other survivors as President Blake gave his speech. Today, we honor those who gave everything to protect our future. They faced the end of worlds and they did not blink. They did not run. They stood their ground and they won. The crowd was massive. Millions of people gathered in person. Billions watching on screens across human space. When President Blake finished, there was a moment of silence. Then as one, everyone began to clap. The applause went on for 10 minutes. After the ceremony, President Blake pulled Jake aside. "Captain Morrison, I want you to know that the Coalition is offering you any position you want. Admiral, Strategic Command, whatever you need." Jake looked at the monument. At Ben's name carved there, at Lisa's, at all the others. "I appreciate that, sir. But I'm not a military man. I never was. I'm an explorer." "The Horizon's Edge has been repaired," the president said. "It's waiting for you if you want it." Jake thought about that. Going back to exploring, back to the quiet of space. It seemed almost impossible after everything that had happened. But it also seemed right. "I'll take it," he said. 2 months passed. Jake spent that time recovering and testifying before the Coalition Council. They wanted to know everything about the Vothir, everything about the battle. The information would help prepare humanity in case something like this ever happened again. Sophie stayed with him through all of it. One night, as they sat together watching the sunset, she asked him a question. "Do you think there are more of them out there? More dreadnoughts?" Jake had wondered the same thing. "I don't know. The data we recovered showed that the Vothir was thousands of years old. Maybe it was the last one, or maybe there are dozens more sleeping in other parts of the galaxy." "That's a terrifying thought." "Yeah, but you know what? If there are more, humanity will be ready. We beat one. We can beat others," Sophie smiled. "When did you become such an optimist?" "When I realized we're still here. Against impossible odds, we survived. That has to mean something." On the day the Horizon's Edge was scheduled to launch again, Jake stood on the dock saying goodbye to the survivors. Each of them was going their own way. Some were staying in the military. Some were going home to families. All of them were changed by what they had experienced. When Sophie arrived with her bag, Jake was surprised. "You're coming?" "Of course I'm coming. Someone has to keep you out of trouble." She grinned. "Besides, exploration sounds a lot safer than fighting alien dreadnoughts." "Don't be so sure about that." They boarded the Horizon's Edge together. The ship felt different now. Empty without Ben working in engineering. Without Lisa at communications. But it was still home. As they left orbit, Jake looked back at New Earth one last time. The planet was safe. Billions of people were going about their lives not knowing how close they had come to extinction. That was good. They deserved to live without fear. "Course plotted," Sophie said from the navigation station. "Where to, Captain?" Jake looked at the star map. So many systems. So many worlds yet to explore. Humanity had faced the end of worlds and survived. Now it was time to push forward again. To explore, to grow, to reach for the stars. "Head for the frontier," he said. "Let's find something new. Something peaceful." Peaceful would be nice for a change. The Horizon's Edge accelerated away from New Earth, its engines burning bright. Behind them, the Coalition was stronger than ever. The surviving crew of the Valiant were being trained to teach others. New ships were being built with the lessons learned from the battle. Humanity wasn't just surviving anymore. It was thriving. As they jumped to hyperspace, Jake thought about what President Blake had said at the memorial. They had faced the end of worlds and won, not because they had the strongest weapons or the biggest ships. They won because they refused to give up. Because they fought together. Because they were human. The galaxy was vast and dangerous. There would be more threats, more challenges. But Jake wasn't afraid anymore. Humanity had proven something important. They could face anything, and they would never stop reaching for the stars. 3 years later, the Horizon's Edge discovered a small planet in an unexplored system. It had water, breathable air, and signs of ancient ruins. Jake and Sophie led the survey team down to the surface. The ruins were old, thousands of years old, and as they explored them, they found something. A memorial of sorts, names carved in stone in a language they couldn't read. But Sophie recognized the pattern. Jake, look at this. The spacing, the organization. This is a memorial, like the one on New Earth. They found more evidence. This planet had been inhabited once by a species that had achieved spaceflight. And then the species was gone, wiped out. The Vother was here, Jake said quietly. This is one of the species it destroyed. They spent weeks studying the ruins, trying to learn about the people who had lived there. They were humanoid. They had art and music. They had families. And then one day the end of worlds had come and they were no more. Before they left, Jake and Sophie added something to the memorial. A plaque in both the human language and the best translation they could make of the ancient writing. It read, "Here lived a people who reached for the stars. They were ended by the Vother, the machine designed to destroy all who dreamed of space. But the Vother is no more. Humanity defeated it. Your deaths have been avenged. Your memory will not be forgotten. Reach for the stars. Dream without fear. The end of worlds has ended." As the horizon's edge left the planet, Sophie asked, "Do you think we'll find more planets like that?" "Probably," Jake said. The data showed hundreds of extinct species, each one with their own worlds, their own history. All gone, but not anymore. No, not anymore. Jake looked out at the stars spreading before them. Humanity had faced extinction and survived. They had beaten the unbeatable, and now they carried a new responsibility: to explore, to remember, to make sure that no other species would face the end of worlds ever again, because the end of worlds was over. Humanity had seen to that. The horizon's edge jumped to hyperspace, heading for the next system, the next discovery, the next adventure. Behind them, billions of humans lived and dreamed and reached for the stars. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs, and that was the most human thing of all.